Back so soon? Oh no, what happened?
A little incident at the dog park. We gotta head to the vet.
Oh, not again. These bills.
We can use CashNet USA. We can apply in minutes, get a fast decision, and have the money in the account as soon as the same business day. All right, Cheddar, back in the car.
When you need money fast, be the hero. All loans subject to lender approval. Speed of funding is subject to verifications and your bank's processing times. See CashNetUSA.com for more details.
This podcast is sponsored by Date My Age.
Dating after 40? Let's just say it's different than it was when I was younger.
What is it they say? Men are like parking spaces. All the good ones are taken.
Does it feel like your dating pool gets smaller as you get older? That's why there's Date My Age, an online dating platform that offers an unmatched global reach. With users in over 40 countries, we're helping singles connect all over the world.
I went from feeling like I had no options to having so much to choose from.
Date My Age connects users based on mutual interest and similarities, not only their location.
When I saw all my matches, it seemed impossible that I wouldn't find the one.
Ready to connect with singles across the globe? Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
I jumped out of the car. I attempted to run to the house, and an officer stopped me. I said, "Is my son okay?" And he said, "He's passed." We did not know initially that it was an officer-involved shooting. We just knew that John had passed away. We had no information about any circumstances.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, a free safe space for people to share and learn from others' experiences with mental health and addictions. I'm Todd Runnebaum, a suicide attempt survivor and a recovering substance abuser. Thank you so much for tuning in again this week. This week I'm speaking with Sheila Albers, and she has a fairly tragic story. She lost her son. He was 17 years old, struggling with his mental health and maybe some addiction issues and things. And ultimately, a police officer ended up taking her son John's life while doing a welfare check on him. Sheila talks about the circumstances leading up to that and the absolute bureaucracy and attempted cover-up and all this stuff that she had to deal with afterwards. As a parent, I can only imagine the devastation would be to lose a child and then to really, really have to fight for justice from the people that are supposed to bring justice. So she talks about all of that. She talks about a lot of the advocacy work she's doing now and what she wishes would change. I'll let her talk about all that. Sheila and a friend is also working on a book, and that'll be coming out at some point. But for now, she's on the podcast. So without further ado, I give you Sheila Albers.
My husband and I have been married for 28 years now. And we were living in St. Louis when we were first married, and I'm an educator and my husband's in insurance. We couldn't get pregnant, and they never could figure out why we weren't getting pregnant. And so we decided to go down the route of international adoption. In the St. Louis area, there was an adoption agency that specialized in bringing babies home from Eastern Europe, and we decided to pursue that. And so John was born December 16th, 2000 in Minsk, Belarus. And the babies coming from Eastern Europe typically are not allowed to be adopted by outside families, international families, until they're at least a year. So we were not able to go bring John home until he was close to 18 months old. So that was 2002, if I remember correctly, May. 8 days in and out of the country to bring him home. He was super healthy. Like, the pediatrician was blown away that he had been in an orphanage for almost a year, over a year, really was developmentally on track. He had white blonde peach fuzz on his head, and he had ice blue eyes. And, I'm biased because I'm his mom, but I thought he was the most beautiful child on the face of the planet. And he had a fantastic personality, like a very positive baby. Like, you would go into his room in the morning or after a nap, and he was standing on the edge of his crib, just grinning, like just grinning. And then his little hair would stick up on the top of his head. He was always a super active kid. He preferred to be outside. He preferred to have a ball in his hand. Academically, he was on track, but he did have ADHD. We noticed that pretty early on. So managing that energy was at times a bit of a challenge as a parent. But he loved sports. I would say that is what kept him going. And any sport, baseball, football, wrestling, soccer was probably his number one. And anything he could be playing with the ball, he was super happy. And so we did not notice any, I would say, significant issues until middle schoolish, 7th, 8th grade. And that is when we started to see an uptick in dishonesty, not hanging out sometimes with kids that were not great influences. And he was really struggling with his own identity in the sense of, I'm adopted. I don't know my birth parents. I actually did go and try to look for some sort of biological connection for him and wasn't successful in that. I think it really ate at him that he didn't have any connection to anyone that he was biologically related to.
Like, it sounds like this is fairly common with children that are adopted. Were you kind of pre-warned, or did you figure this might happen?
When you go through the adoption process, there's usually classes that you take and social workers run them, and they talk about that. So I wasn't surprised by it. And I also thought, well, if I could find an aunt or a grandmother or somebody that he could at least have some communication with, it might give him that sense of connection that he felt was missing. But, those records are closed. I even wrote to the Belarusian government on it, and, I didn't get anywhere, but I felt that I owed John at least trying to do that for him. So, but when we noticed the changes in behavior, we got him into therapy. He needed a lot of parenting. So we were just in and around him as much as we could in order to make sure that he was making good decisions, doing well in school, then able to work through his emotional issues to come out on the other side in a positive way. Freshman year was really difficult for him. Like, he chose a really not good group of friends. So and I was grateful for this, he decided to switch high schools his sophomore year, and just another neighboring high school, but just to get away from some of the people he was hanging out with. That was a good move. But he was still, I would say, on an emotional roller coasters, up and down, and had some negative interactions with law enforcement. And then the day he was killed, he was at a course to be recertified to be a soccer ref. He ref soccer since he was in 7th grade. He was really good at it, and he loved doing it. And the class was at a sporting goods store in a classroom in the back of the store, and he got caught shoplifting. That it was not a good day, and there's no reason for him to shoplift. We live in an affluent community. John lacked for nothing. I think it was the quite honestly, the adrenaline high of stealing and, seeing if he could get away with it. He obviously didn't. My husband had to go pick him up. The police released him to our custody, and we were obviously pretty angry with him that day. Like, why would you do this?
What year was this?
2018.
Okay, so he was 18 years old.
He was 17 at that
17.
time.
Okay,
Yep.
got it.
So he was 17, and it was January 20th, 2018. We got him home, and we had plans that evening to go grill over at a extended family's home and have dinner with them, cousins that John knows and really loved, and he did not want to go. And so, he knew he was grounded from going out with friends because of the decision he had made earlier in the day. But we told him, if you want to come and have dinner with us and hang out there, you're welcome to do that. And he was, he was in a super bad mood. He said, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. So I don't know, about 5 or 5:15, we left, my husband and I and my other 2 boys, and we were maybe 15, 20 minutes away.
Younger boys, I'm guessing. Younger than John.
Yep. My second child is 5 years younger than John, and then also adopted. And then my third child is 9 years younger than John, and he was my biological surprise.
Oh.
And so the 4 of us went, and that's when the most unthinkable thing possible happened.
I mean, I don't know if all my audience knows this or not, but I have been in the psych ward, and the police basically had to come and handcuff me and take me to the psych ward. I guess how did the police even get to your house? Did he call them?
No, he did not call them. So what he did it was early evening. So it was still light outside. He posted on Snapchat some suicidal type comments like, I'm done, I'm finished. And he had an empty pill bottle in front of him, and there was some alcohol. But and I'll get to that a little bit later. But 2 people, one I think was a friend, one I don't know, made a call to 911. Basically, we see this kid on Snapchat making these very alarming comments. So Overland Park Police Department sent 2 vehicles to the house. My phone was in my purse. I don't know, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes after we were there, I grabbed my phone out of my purse and looked at it, and I immediately could tell that there was something really, really wrong. Like I was getting texts and my phone was ringing. I immediately looked at Steve and I said, something's really wrong. We have to go. So we literally jumped in the car and flew home. We came down the street that kind of runs perpendicular to our street. And I jumped out of the car, and my house was 3 doors down. And I attempted to run to the house, and an officer stopped me. And I said, is my son okay? And he said, he's passed. And I dropped to the ground. I didn't know what or why or what had happened. And we came to find out later that 2 officers arrived, and neither went to the door, neither knocked on the door, neither made any contact with John. One of the 2 officers, they chatted on the driveway for a second, and one of them ran back to his patrol car to grab his cell phone to see, I think, if they could attempt to get me on the phone. And the other officer kind of stood on our front lawn behind this super skinny tree. And then he made his way to the driveway and unholstered his gun. And then he watched our garage door slowly open as he has his gun unholstered. And John then what he did was he took the keys to my minivan, and he was attempting to leave the house. And, my guess is that John was just going to when he got really upset, he would run, like basically run to a friend's house, run somewhere. He would just like escape. And the car started to pull out, and the officer yelled, "Stop. John, stop the car." But he doesn't identify himself as an officer. He doesn't know John. This is not an officer we had ever had any communication with. He has no idea about John's background. And he fires the first of 13 rounds into the car. So, and the car is coming out. Now the police and the department, or the district attorney's office, attempted to say that the car came out rapidly and aggressively towards the officer, and that the officer feared for his life, and that is how they justified the shooting. But months down the road, we were able to get enough forensic evidence that showed that the officer fired his shots always to the side of the vehicle. He was never behind the vehicle. When he fired the first 2 shots, I don't know if either one of those killed or incapacitated John. I'm assuming one of them did. But the car then kind of turns around. And at that point, I think John slumped over the steering wheel, and the car rolls backwards, and the officer fires 11 more rounds. So of the 13 shots that were fired, 6 of them hit John, like from his upper torso through his head. And so he was killed at the scene. So when we got to our home, we did not know initially that it was an officer-involved shooting. We just knew that John had passed away. We had no information about any circumstances. And so we sat outside on a neighbor's driveway, waiting for someone to give us some information. And my husband finally at some point approached an officer and said, "Why can't we see our son?" I wanted to see John. I wanted to see him. And they said, "Well, we're waiting for the OSIT team." And my husband's like, "What's the OSIT team and why do I care?" And the officer replied back, "Well, that's the officer-involved shooting investigation team for Johnson County, Kansas, and it is protocol for us to wait until they arrive on the scene." That's the first indication that we got that it was a police officer that had shot John.
Well, did you have any assumptions before that?
We don't own firearms. Like, there's no firearms in my home. So I thought, well, did he attempt to hurt himself or, die by suicide? But when they said there was gunshots, I'm like, well, where would that come from? And so when we left the scene, I don't know, we were probably there an hour, 90 minutes waiting for information. We left knowing that an officer had discharged his firearm. But that's it. That's all we had. And we were not allowed back in our home because it was considered a crime scene. So we went to my sister-in-law's home.
But who committed the crime? What crime?
Well, and that's a super interesting point that you bring that up. That so the crime scene investigative team for the county did show up. Like I now know, looking back, that I'm like, oh, that's who those people were, because they come with these very fancy cameras that do 360-degree photographs, and they collect all the evidence because they're supposed to then provide an accurate report to the police department on what happened at the incident. We go to my sister-in-law's home. We're there that evening. We're still not getting any information. Thank God I had a really close girlfriend who said, "You're going to need an attorney." I'm like, what attorney? Where? Thank God they put us in contact with someone who very talented. And it wasn't until the next day that 2 officers from this OSIT team. So this OSIT team if the shooting occurs in Overland Park, which is the suburb I live in, the officers are from surrounding municipalities so that Overland Park is not investigating itself. It's supposed to be an impartial, unbiased way of conducting the investigation.
All right. So there's no conflict of interest or anything.
Correct. Right. In theory, it sounds quite good. In its actual application, it's a sham. So these two officers come, and we stupidly think that they're there to offer us information. Oh, they're here to help us. Like, they're going to tell us what happened. And we figured out within 10 minutes or so, that is not the role they're playing. You know, they immediately start kind of peppering us with questions. You know, was John involved in drugs? Was he drinking alcohol? Was he, did he have any violent tendencies? Did he have, and we sat there kind of with our jaws hanging open, and my husband's like, how about you tell us who shot our son, how many times, and why? And they turned to us and said, well, we can't tell you that. Then they wanted to separate us both, interview us separately. And my husband's like, no, nope. And we said, we have communicated with an attorney. And as soon as we said that, the conversation was over. Like, they were polite, but they left. And we got to get back in our house later that day. Then you live in this world of a police officer just shot and killed my child. No one is giving me any information. And what little information that is out there makes it sound as if it was John's fault.
A 17-year-old boy.
Yes. And I always tell people unarmed. So our attorneys, I should say, Mike Rader and Michelle Marvel, who I still consider like friends today, they were so outstanding to our family, said we now wait for OSIT to do their investigation, and we wait for the district attorney to meet with us to tell us what the outcome of the investigation is.
At this point, did you have faith in the system? Like, well, they'll get to the bottom of this and everything will be good?
A little bit, yeah, because I had never had negative interactions with police before. Like, I was a school principal, so I worked with law enforcement in certain situations, and had always had a positive relationship with them. And my husband became much more pessimistic about it than I was initially. It took me longer to get there. So on January 26th, we had John's funeral mass. You know, we packed the church with friends and family and John's classmates, and you know, we had him cremated. And so we celebrated his life the best that we could under the really horrific circumstances that we were in. And so I also look back on some of this tragedy, and I want to like point out the things where people stepped up to help us or mental health was provided. Children's Mercy here in Kansas City had developed a relationship with the school district that we lived in and where I worked. And they sent grief counselors from Children's Mercy into John's high school to help his classmates process what had happened. I'm very grateful that they did that. My boys received therapy services through Children's Mercy. And then my husband and I did too, but with an outside provider.
Was there therapy one-on-one, or was it kind of group? Like, was it with the whole class?
At the high school, it was like provided to, it was group, but not, I mean, he was in a junior class of 400 kids. So what they do is they send a flight team in, and they set up either in like the library or the office or somewhere where they can break kids out. If they need to be one-on-one, they can, or if they're in group settings, they can. And it basically, kids can access the services if they want to.
I see. Okay.
I think about other schools and other districts where some horrific tragedy has occurred and where those services were not provided. And then the kids are just left there to struggle.
Well, it's tough for kids too, because sometimes it takes, for me anyway, after a tragedy or so, it almost takes me a week before I'm even ready to process and talk about it. And you could bring in counselors and kids not even feel like they need it until 6 months later or something.
Right. And Blue Valley is better than most in that, like, for the kids who didn't access the services right away or did and then needed follow-up and needed more down the road, I think the district worked really hard to support kids through
that's
that.
good.
Yeah. I don't know how someone comes out on the other side of trauma like that without mental health support. And the people who are most impacted, like his close friends, like ongoing mental health support. It's not like 2 days afterwards, I met with a therapist once and now it's all okay. There's months, if not years of work ahead to make sure that trauma doesn't manifest itself in some really ugly way down the road. So John was killed on January 20th, 2018. We had his funeral on the 26th, and our attorney said the district attorney will reach out to us when the investigation's complete, and we will meet with him. And so it was 30 days later, actually. It was February 19th, and an ice storm had rolled into Kansas City, and the district attorney contacted our attorney and said, the investigation's complete. I've reached a decision. You can come in and meet with me tomorrow. And he said, but if the weather's bad, so if you want to do it over the phone, we can do it that way too. And my husband and I are like, no, we will meet you face to face. So we go in to, his name is Steve Howe, and we go into Steve Howe's office, and it's my husband and I. Steve Howe's at the head of a table. Our attorney takes the other head of the table. And then it's two officers from OSITs kind of sitting across from us. And I've told this part of the story a million times, but Steve Howe began the conversation with this very flippant comment of, well, I know no one really wants to be here today. And I remember thinking, this man has zero empathy, zero compassion. Like, you're sitting in front of parents who've lost a child. And that's how you start the conversation? Oh, right before we walked into that conversation, our attorney, Mike Rader, said to me, and I'm very grateful he did this. He said, Sheila, I want you to be prepared that this district attorney is not going to charge the police officer. He won't. He never has, and he never will. And I remember feeling so angry when Mike said that to me. Like, I wanted to punch Mike in the face. Like, why would you say that to me? I'm going into this thinking they're going to do the right thing here. And I'm so glad that he prepared me for that, because then when that's exactly what occurred, I at least wasn't blindsided. And so we get 10 minutes into the conversation, and Steve Howe says, well, the shooting is justified. The officer had legitimate reason to fear for his life. I'm, clearing him of any criminal wrongdoing. And then he proceeds to tell us that he has dash cam video. And Overland Park at that point did not have body cams. They only had dash cam, and they had an audio pack on their vest. But he said, I have dash cam video, and I'm going to release it today. And we had no prior warning that was going to occur. And he said, I'll show it to you now if you want to see it before the press conference I am doing that starts at 10:30. And this is 9:30 in the morning. He had already alerted the media. He had already had it all set up. And my husband leaned across and he goes, why would you do that? Like, you haven't even let us see it. And he said, well, there's so much misinformation out there about it. And he goes, I want to be transparent. And my husband said, well, if you're transparent, then why don't you release the name of the officer? And he said, I won't do that. So I could feel myself wanting to completely lose it in there. And so I turned to Mike Rader and I said, I cannot watch that video with these people in the room. Like, I'm not going to watch my son die on video in front of these people. And so my husband and I excused ourselves from the meeting, and our attorney stayed and watched it. And he came out of the meeting a few minutes later, and he actually had tears in his eyes. And he said, I don't understand why they're releasing this. It doesn't actually help them, but the media is on their way, and I need you to get out of here because I don't want cameras and microphones in your faces. So we did.
There's no way you guys could have said, don't release this yet, get a judge or get somebody to I guess I have no idea how that works, but
No, I mean, it's the city's custodial property, the footage. But what we didn't know at the time is there were 4 dash cams and a Ring doorbell cam, our neighbors across the street. And we had the copy of the Ring doorbell cam from our neighbors because those neighbors are fantastic. And they said, you need to have this. The police also had it, which was fine. They said the police asked for it. We gave it to them, but we give you a copy too. The footage that Steve Howe released that day were 2 redacted dash cams, no Ring doorbell cam. So they released pieces of the video that backed the narrative they wanted to disseminate, which was, well, they painted the picture that he was drinking or on drugs and attempted to run the police officer over. That was the implied message, was this officer's life was in jeopardy because John Albers was trying to run him over. Our attorney hired a forensic expert who then used the Ring doorbell cam and the two redacted dash cams that we did have to recreate what occurred. And what information was released in those days and that month after John was killed and what actually occurred didn't match. But that's one of the playbooks that's out there, is spreading false narratives. It turns out John's toxicology screen showed no illegal drugs whatsoever. He had a minimal amount of Adderall in his system because he took an ADHD medication. And when I gave him the prescription bottle, what he had in his system matched what he was supposed to be prescribing to take. And then he had like equivalent of a sip of a beer. Like the bottom of the coroner's report says, not under the influence of any substances. So he was not impaired. He was not high, and we didn't get those autopsy results until the end of March. So it was 60 days before we got those results.
well, how can they even do an investigation without having those results?
That's a really good question. So in Kansas, any body cam footage, any investigative report is considered what they call a criminal investigative record, and therefore it is not subject to open records. So the only way to obtain those records, like what the OSIT report said, is to litigate for it. Our attorney filed our lawsuit in April. We got a good federal judge. In police shootings, one of the many obstacles there are to getting any sort of truth and justice is that you have to survive what they call a motion to dismiss. So the municipality usually will file to try to get the case dismissed because they're going to say officer had qualified immunity, they were working in their role as a police officer, they can't be held liable. And in many, many, many cases do get dismissed and it's over and the police officer walks away. In our case, we got a great judge and the judge denied the city's motion to dismiss and our lawsuit moved forward. And that is when Overland Park realized that the facts didn't help them. So they wanted to go in and mediate and we settled the civil lawsuit.
This podcast is sponsored by Date My Age.
Dating after 40? Let's just say it's different than it was when I was younger.
What is it they say? Men are like parking spaces. All the good ones are taken.
Does it feel like your dating pool gets smaller as you get older? That's why there's Date My Age, an online dating platform that offers an unmatched global reach. With users in over 40 countries, we're helping singles connect all over the world.
I went from feeling like I had no options to having so much to choose from.
Date My Age connects users based on mutual interest and similarities, not only their location.
When I saw all my matches, it seemed impossible that I wouldn't find the one.
Ready to connect with singles across the globe? Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
So there were no criminal charges against the officer at all, and he resigned from the police department. What we were told that he resigned from the police department within a week or two of John's death. And then from a civil standpoint, we did receive a settlement, and that settlement really is honestly what I have used. I resigned my position as a school principal in June of 2019, and I have just basically been doing advocacy work around mental health and public safety and government transparency since I resigned my position in 2019. And so it has given me the freedom to push for change and not have to be working a full-time job at the same time.
Do you consider his death a murder?
I consider it involuntary manslaughter. I don't think the officer, the night he showed up on the scene, had intent to kill John. Like, I don't think he went to work and said, oh, I want to kill an innocent kid tonight. But I do think he broke the law. I do think he should have been terminated. He should have had his law enforcement license taken, and he should have been charged with involuntary manslaughter.
Just like someone who does with a DUI or any other kind of work accident, or?
Correct.
That's very fair. Have you talked to the people that called 911 originally?
One of them.
Okay.
One of them. I do think some of John's friends felt some guilt around having called 911 or not being there for him. Or I think there's a certain amount of guilt. Like, I live with, my husband lives with, his friends live with, like,
which is very common in tragic situations like this.
It's one of the cruelest mind games you can play with yourself is to say, well, if I had only done, or if I had instead stayed home or put my minivan keys somewhere else, or a million things run through your head. And I'm better now about the officer who killed John had served time in Iraq and did over 200 combat missions. Yep. And I think was probably struggling with his own version of PTSD. The system has failed my family on multiple fronts, but the system has also failed that officer. He did not have crisis intervention team training, which is a 40-hour training on how to de-escalate mental health issues. He did not have that training. I also feel he probably had his own mental health struggles, and he wasn't seeking or getting any help for it either. In hindsight, it's 2020, but he probably didn't need to be a police officer. Like, there's a lot of research out there that talks about people who have experienced combat, and then they come back and they go into law enforcement, and their mind doesn't make the switch from combat situations as compared to suburban America, and the training's very different. So really, he's no longer in law enforcement. He doesn't have at least a Kansas peace officer license that I'm aware of. I try not to beat myself up, and I've told John's friends this. I'm like, do not beat yourself up over it. You did the right thing. You were worried about him. You called 911. I've said that so many times, that the kids made the call because their intent was to help, and so they should not feel badly about that at all.
I mean, who knows what would happen if they hadn't, too.
Right.
Yeah, it is that is a very complex mind game. There's no winning that game.
No, there's no good that comes from that either. Like, at some point you have to accept the fact that John's not coming back. And so what can we do to honor him? And what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And that's a much healthier way to think about it, because what you're trying to do is minimize tragedy.
It sounds like you've found some empathy for the officer.
I have.
I'm sure that took time. I get it. Like listening to his situation, it's more like if you have resentment, it's to the system and to covering people's asses, and so that the city doesn't have to pay out lawsuits and all this thing, and that both of you were really taken advantage of.
Yeah, I don't feel any anger towards the officer anymore. I feel badly for him in some respects because it's unfair to him to say, oh, now you're going to go fight a war in a foreign country, see 200 combat missions, probably saw really horrific things, now come back and here's a badge, here's a gun. We're not going to give you appropriate training, and please go respond to a mental health call appropriately. And I think that, and this is speculation on my part, but if he hadn't killed John that night, I feel like he was a ticking time bomb, that something else was going to happen. That's where the system comes into play. Like, we need to be more careful about the people that we're hiring. And then when we do, we need to make sure that they receive the appropriate training. And if there is an egregious mistake, there needs to be accountability. And none of that happened. We did eventually get the investigative report on John's death. It wasn't until 3 years later. And we only got it because local media sued the city for it. And it turned out that nothing about the officer's background was in the report, that the report was really about painting John in the worst possible light. So they obtained all his mental health records. They didn't have what you would typically see in a homicide investigation, a crime scene map, a trajectory report, things that you would see in kind of law enforcement 101 were completely missing from the report. The officer's military background wasn't even mentioned. His 200 combat missions, nowhere in the report. And it was years later we realized that those investigations really are very one-sided. Their ultimate goal really is to clear the officer of any misconduct. It is not to do a thorough, impartial investigation. And in fact, the district attorney made his decision before all the crime lab reports that they would use in a homicide investigation were even complete.
Right, including the toxicology.
Yeah. I think he probably had the tox screen because that part, from what I understand, comes back within a few days. But they did not release that to us.
Right. Because it looked bad.
Correct. Right. I initially thought, I'm like, okay, what if he was on something that I was not aware of? What if he did something and I didn't know? And when we did finally get those reports 60 days later, slowly over time, I started to realize we're being lied to.
You start to become cynical. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I can't even, as a parent, I couldn't even imagine. It seems like it would be easier to deal with if he was murdered by a murderer.
But you would get more answers. You would actually get more information and more answers than if the violent event occurred involving a police officer. Because we spent a year in litigation with both sides going back and forth, and I had a million questions that were not getting answered. A friend of our family, or he's actually a member of my extended family, but he's a retired attorney. He started doing open records requests. He wanted to see what's the protocol for this, what's the process for this, and he started to do all these open records requests, and I didn't even know what an open records request was. And Mark started to explain it to me, and I started to understand that I'm like, oh, he's trying to get me the answers that I don't have yet. I started to read what he was writing and some of the responses he was getting back. Our attorney asked us just to stay quiet during litigation. And he said, if the case settles and it's over with, then go to town, do whatever you want, do interviews, do all your open records requests, do whatever you feel passionate about. And so when the case settled, and the city did try to get us to sign a non-disclosure agreement, like they wanted us to not talk about it once. And I said, that is a hard no. Like, under no circumstances will I sign an NDA. And that would have been, we would have walked away from the table if that was the deal breaker. But I think they were so desperate to get it over with. We signed settlement agreement, no NDA. And then I just went to town. I did boatloads of open records requests. I started to collect information. I started to put the pieces together for the puzzle that I didn't have an understanding of yet.
Have you ever talked with him or met with him? Or
No.
Out of respect for him or for yourselves or both?
I think it's probably for both. I don't get the feeling that he would find it helpful. Like, I don't, just 2 years ago, Washington Post they did a documentary on John, like a 20-minute piece, mini documentary on the investigation of his death. And they obtained some audio from the night of that I had never heard. It's a really short piece of audio. And the reporter called me and said, I want to make sure you've heard this before I include it in this story, because I don't want it to be the first time you hear it. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I guess as Jennison was walking, the officer's name is Clayton Jennison, as he was walking away from the scene, he said, I fucking hate that kid, which to me speaks to his mindset after having killed someone. And I'm thinking, why would you say that? You didn't even know John. Like, you didn't even know him. I don't see ever communicating with him being productive.
Has he ever done interviews or anything?
No. May of 2020, the world, we're in COVID. We're in lockdown. My 2 other boys are home. Like, the world's been turned upside down. But my life had gotten a little quieter in the sense of I wasn't running a building as middle school principal. I had time to process everything that had occurred. In that more quiet time, I wondered, did they pay Jennison off to leave the force? And I remember thinking to myself, well, people are going to think I'm a little crazy if I say that. And I verbalized it to a friend, and this friend said, I don't think that's crazy. I think that's a possibility. So I was a public employee, so I knew my salary was public record because tax dollars paid my salary. And I thought, well, that means his has got to be too somewhere. So I collaborated with a local reporter, and I said, if there's a payout to him, it's got to be recorded on some document somewhere. So this reporter does an open records request for payroll for the police department for February and March of 2018. Those are the 2 months right after John was killed. He gets those reports, but there's no names on it. It just shows total number of dollars being paid out on a particular payroll period. They had him separated out into the day shift, the evening shift, and the night shift. And he gave them to me, and I kind of spread them out on my kitchen counter. And I thought, well, Jennison worked the evening shift, so I'm just going to pull the evening shift. And I looked at those 4 pay periods, 2 in February, 2 in March. And there was one of those pay periods that there was a slight spike in the number of dollars going out, about $100,000. And I said to the reporter, I'm like, I think that's where the payout is. And this is a person I like. I get along. But he kind of laughed at me. He goes, Sheila, what proof do you have of that? And I'm like, I think that that's where the payout is. He said, well, that's fine, but we still can't prove it. So I stood in my kitchen with my phone and I typed the officer's name into Google and I put salary 2018 and his salary popped up. And what I did not know, and a lot of reporters and attorneys know this, but there's databases out there with salaries on them if you're a public employee. So you can look up anybody who's like a teacher or a firefighter or a police officer or whomever. And his salary for 2018 showed $81,000. He was a second-year cop, and he only worked 3 weeks in 2018 because he worked from January 1 to the day that he killed John. And my husband was standing in the kitchen, and he looked at my face, and he goes, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, I think I found the payout. And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I turned my phone around, and he goes, "What second-year cop makes $81,000 a year?" And I said,
A month.
"In a month?" Right. So I screenshotted it, and I sent it out to media contacts. And so in May, June of 2020, 2.5 years after John was killed, we came to find out that the city offered him a $70,000 severance package to leave the police department. And that, in fact, he did not leave within a week or two of John being killed. His last day was March 4th, and it was because they were in process of negotiating his exit agreement. And that was the game changer for us and for our community because, yes, there was an outcry for some better transparency and some more accountability, but actual proof that they paid him to leave, like that enraged this community. And it made local and national news. And the city got crucified for that. So then you don't get a check of that size without some sort of an agreement. All I had proof was that he was paid. But then the media went after the city to say, well, where's the agreement that went with the check? And so the Kansas City Star sued the city of Overland Park for the severance agreement. And it went to court, and the judge sided with the Star. So the agreement became public. And the agreement said Overland Park will report Clayton Jennison's resignation from the Overland Park Police Department as personal resignation under ordinary circumstances. And that's what they reported to the state because that allowed him to keep his peace officer license. So anytime a police officer leaves a department anywhere across the country, the chief of police has to sign a piece of paper under perjury of law that states the reason why the officer's leaving, whether it's retirement, resignation, whatever. But there was a box that said under investigation, potential lawsuit, whatever. And that's the box they should have checked, which then would have potentially maybe put his peace officer license in jeopardy. But they did not. The chief signed off that said he left for personal reasons under ordinary circumstances. And so summer of 2020, John's story in addition to talking about mental health and mental health training and supporting first responders working with someone in a mental health crisis, we were now talking about then transparency and accountability simultaneously. And we had leverage now to ask for some change.
Wow. That's unbelievable. I can't, again, as a parent, I couldn't imagine losing a child in a violent way like that, but then also to have to constantly fight for years to get answers and acknowledge or have people take accountability. I am so sorry you had to go through all this. I know you have a book out now.
Right. So the work is exhausting, don't get me wrong, but now the work I do is really not on my son's behalf or our case because we've really gotten as much resolution that severance agreement, that severance payment triggered the Department of Justice to open a civil rights investigation into John's death. And so that started September of 2020. It resolved 2 years later. There was no indictment of the officer, which was disappointing, but they did put out a statement to correct the narrative around John's death. And they did that per my request. And it was great closure for us and for our community to hear the truth about what occurred. And it really, I think it has changed now how sometimes these deaths are handled. And now the work I actually do really is for other families. I quietly connect families to good legal services. I make sure that they're getting access to mental health care. So I do that very kind of quietly from behind the scenes. More publicly, I have the great fortune of making friends with a woman named Nareen Stokes Crosby. And Nareen's son was killed by Kansas City, Missouri Police Department in 2013. And her son was unarmed, no criminal background. They put out a very ugly false narrative about him. And she and I fight together. Nareen is Black, and I'm obviously white. She raised her 3 kids in more of an urban setting versus mine in a suburban setting. But we have so much in common, and we both want change, that we're more powerful together than we are separately. And so our story is coming out in a book called Mothers in Arms. It should be out late 2025 or early 2026. And it highlights John and Ryan's stories, and where my hope is that the book inspires change. How do you get policies changed? How do you get increased transparency? How do we make sure that families are treated with dignity, and that we have greater access to mental health care?
And welfare checks are not just done by police, but maybe a mental health expert or something.
Right. And some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. So I should also say that since John's death, my relationship with where I live has changed dramatically, because we elected a new mayor 4 years ago. We have a new city manager. We just brought on a new chief of police in October. We have now a behavioral health unit that responds to welfare calls. We have more officers with CIT training, and our use of force policy now bans shooting into a moving vehicle. So the city has done, in my opinion, a 180. Instead of being the example of what not to do, I think we're blazing the trail of what municipalities should be doing moving forward.
That's amazing. It's unfortunate that it's like John had to sacrifice himself for people in the future to be saved. It's just amazing that these changes were able to happen.
I mean, I'm very proud of the work, and we've had really amazing. Like, we have not done this by ourselves. I mean, my neighbors, my family, my friends, colleagues, certain members of city council now, like they're moving that work ahead. So what you have to get the ball rolling, and then find out who will step in and collaborate with you to make it happen.
Something I find interesting, like with the race issue, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not race, maybe it's also socioeconomics. Like, sounds like you had a very strong support system, and you had the ability to go and get attorneys and do things, where some people, they don't have the support, and if the report comes out, their child or husband, whoever, was killed by police during a welfare check, and that's the end of it.
Right.
And they don't have the capacity or the abilities to go after or to find the truth and get the transparency that they deserve. It sounds like that's kind of what you're doing for other families now as well.
Yes. I mean, you're spot on that, correct? That many families don't have the resources or the support network or the knowledge base to ask questions to get what they need and deserve. And so I want to pay that forward. So many people stepped up to help and change things and do things differently. I want to be that resource for other families.
Or at least point them in the right direction where
Correct.
they
Right.
can find those resources.
Yes. And so that they're not left just with their loved one as a statistic. That has actually brought me the most peace, is to, when something awful has happened, that I pick up the phone and I try to make contact and then suggest resources to them, and so they don't feel alone. I mean, you can feel very isolated in those circumstances, and I don't want people to and feel, you can feel very powerless, and that is not a good place to be. And that's why people will say, "Oh, Sheila's very anti-law enforcement," and I disagree with that adamantly. I'm pro law enforcement, but I'm also pro accountability. I really feel policing is in flux right now. And the the people that I support are chiefs and law enforcement officers who see policing going in a different direction, reimagining what it could look like in a community.
I'm very lucky that in my city, we had an amazing chief of police for years. He retired about a year ago.
I'm a huge fan of Ernie Stevens and Joe Smarrow. They're both former San Antonio police officers, and they started the behavioral health unit on the San Antonio Police Department. And then they became the subject of an HBO documentary called Crisis Cops. Really excellent documentary, very pro law enforcement, but also they show how policing needs to change. And so I follow them both on social media. I've watched the movie. I have their books. I would like to clone Ernie Stevens and Joe Smarrow across the country. I feel our new chief of police that we hired in October is in that same boat. I'm very grateful we have her. She's our first female chief. And people ask me, do you feel safe? Yes, I feel safe now. I think we're headed in a better direction. I think that things have changed for the better.
Really, all you need is a chief with some kind of empathy and brains, maybe? I don't know.
Yes. Ideally, they're empathetic and they're smart. And then if they work in collaboration with public health and mental health services and the school district and community organizations, that's how communities thrive, is when those groups collaborate with one another. In my little municipality of 200,000 people, I feel like that's the direction we're headed in. It's been a long road, and there are people who are still unhappy with the changes that I have pushed. So I don't want it to make it sound like it was a walk in the park. It was not. But I think our book and me doing podcasts will hopefully inspire people to do that in their own communities.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Thank you for not just sharing, but for doing the work that you do, for recognizing that other people aren't as privileged and could really use help finding justice for the loss of their loved ones in police shootings, and for trying to change the culture within police departments. So kudos. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone that's been leaving ratings and reviews, sending me messages, buying me coffees, buying merch, all that stuff. It is so incredibly appreciated. If you like the podcast, if you want to help support the podcast, this free mental health service, then please go to my website, bunnyhugspodcast.com. You can find all types of links on there to buying coffees and buying merch or my social media, etc. It's all there. The one thing that isn't there is leaving ratings and reviews. You do that on the podcast platform you're listening on right now. The more ratings and reviews a podcast gets, the easier it is to find for others. And why would you want to deny others this podcast when it's helped so many people feel seen with their mental health and their mental illnesses and their situations? So please do that if you haven't already. And thank you so much for Carey for all the work you do. Always very much appreciated. And until next time, please remember to make your beds and take your meds. Bye.